Hey, people. So, I'm assuming many of you have been following these developments out of Minneapolis. And wow, I was watching the live stream last night carried out by an individual who was amongst the protesters slash rioters at the 3rd Precinct Police Building in Minneapolis. And it was wild. You could actually follow along as he, along with these other agitated activists slash rioters slash protesters, invaded the police precinct building because apparently police had fled the building. They had retreated. So they surrendered their precinct building to these activists, which is unlike anything that I personally have ever seen before. And I'm actually curious to have people with maybe a more in-depth knowledge of U.S. history, the history of civil unrest and so forth, to see if they can come up with an analogous example of something like this happening in the past, where the police actually stand down and allow their own building to be infiltrated by a crowd of agitators or activists or protesters, whatever you want to call them exactly. Because I'm not aware of a precedent for this. So it was stunning to watch. I don't know if you can go get an archival form of that stream, but I'm assuming a lot of people were watching it, including people in law enforcement, which is why it was just incredible to me that you had these participants in this action freely allowing themselves to be interviewed on camera with their faces exposed, as if they had no awareness that they were confessing to crimes and that clearly law enforcement would take a keen interest in those public confessions that they were offering. And by the way, a lot of these protesters or what have you were white. I actually just, in eyeballing it, and granted I was only watching the stream, I wasn't there physically, but in watching the stream you got a pretty good sense of the demographic composition of who was there. It really appeared to me that a majority of the protesters were white. And again, protester isn't even exactly the right term, I don't think, when you're talking about an invasion of a police precinct. A lot of these protesters were armed, at least according to the stream. And at one point, you even saw protesters or one of these individuals make it to the roof of the police building and like celebrate triumphantly as if they just captured it in battle. So it was bizarre to watch. There were claims that they had gotten into some kind of evidence room or evidence locker and were extracting evidence and then running away with it. I saw at least one of these people appearing to run away with a carton of what looked like possibly evidence. It's hard to tell with precision given that I'm just watching a stream, but that's what it looked like. And there were definitely at least claims that they had breached an evidence room, which means that potentially a lot of criminal cases are compromised. And, I'm sure that was an objective of the people protesting. Now, of course, the instigating event in this was the killing of a man, George Floyd, under egregious circumstances. I mean, you can't watch that video of the officer kneeling onto his neck, suffocating him for, I think it was 9 minutes, and not come away thinking that that officer was just behaving psychopathically. I mean, how does any human, cop or not, just feel that it's warranted to suffocate a person on the ground like that, especially a person who is not violent, seemed to have been complying. So the outrage that resulted from this killing, I think, is entirely warranted. And you see, for the most part, unanimity across political divides in terms of their perceptions as to the impropriety, to put it mildly, of that police action. So Trump even kind of sort of condemned it yesterday. You had other law enforcement officials condemning it. You had Republicans and Democrats largely on the same page. Very, very few defenders of that police action that I saw. And the police officers involved were fired. But the officer who perpetrated the killing hasn't been arrested. And it seems rather clear cut that he had to have violated some kind of criminal law. So people are rightly incensed, I think, that the levers of justice haven't been pulled swiftly enough in a way that's proportionate with the offense that clearly was committed. But then, what you have is that a certain band of left-wing activists takes an event where there are legitimate grievances. So the local population, in particular the black population in Minneapolis, clearly has a legitimate grievance here. And not just the black population, I mean any local population across racial lines who wants a fair and reasonable police force. They have a grievance. But then you have these left-wing activists who then overlay their own rather parochial concerns onto this underlying event and flood in, often from out of town. So they're not personally affected in terms of the actions of the Minneapolis Police Department, but they flood in and they polarize it. So it becomes much more than about the specific misconduct committed by the police officer and the need to get some kind of remedy on behalf of the deceased victim, the victim's family, friends, community, etc. These left-wing activists then charge in and they make it about, their regular litany of grievances. U.S. capitalism, white supremacy, imperialism, etc. Now, I mean, if those are your priorities, okay, but don't claim as though you're this authentic representation of the local community when you're taking you're waging an ideological mission on the backs of kind of just regular folks who have endured a grave injustice. You're not representative of them. You're representative of yourself. You have a self-serving reason why you want to kind of performatively go around and cause just random chaos, which is what they did last night. So I mean, arguably it was at least justified in a sense, potentially, to target a police precinct building. But you had small businesses burned to the ground. You had public libraries that were vandalized, and I don't know if they were destroyed, but they were under attack, so to say. And, you even had, I saw a local reporter put out today that there was a Native American youth organization called Migizi Communication that was burned. And over the course of that burning, everything was lost that was housed inside the building, including archives, historic material, and photos. So you had just random chaos. And we don't know with exactitude who in particular burned what, but it was obvious, blaringly obvious, if you watched that feed last night, that it was predominantly white left-wing activists who were there. Obviously, there were black activists as well, and just some regular people thrown in, and just people who were there for the thrill. and also some with legitimate grievances. So it's a mishmash, as with virtually any street unrest of this kind. But it was really sociologically interesting to observe, because for the most part, when you think of a black man being killed by a white police officer under suspicious circumstances, in this case, not even suspicious circumstances, under overtly, psychopathic circumstances, you think of the response being some kind of racially inflected response. So this happened in Ferguson. That's happened many times in the past. And you can kind of derisively refer to the subsequent reactions like a race riot, right? Because you have the black population coming out and protesting the largely white police force. But in this circumstance, it was different. It was a largely white response. Now, probably that's in part due to the demographics of Minnesota, largely white state, but there are black pockets of Minnesota. There's a black population there. And you had, no, don't get me wrong, there were black people there, definitely. But it really did appear to me that at least at this confrontation at the police precinct building, a majority of the participants were white, or if not a strict majority, I couldn't count them myself, but it was at least a very strong plurality. And so you can't really call it a race riot, because it wasn't. It was like an ideological thing. And so that was really interesting. What's amazing to me is like that a political decision was clearly made by the mayor, Jacob Fry, who has a fantastic head of hair, by the way. You should look him up. Good looking guy. He apparently decided that for political reasons, he was going to order the officers to retreat from this police precinct building. So it was a political calculation. It wasn't like the officers were overwhelmed in terms of manpower. They were ordered to leave, to vacate. And I think that's probably because Tim Walz is the governor. Jacob Fry, he's a liberal Democrat. He wanted to convey his sympathy and affinity with the grievances of the population, and those grievances are largely legitimate as a result of this killing. But in so doing, he created a set of conditions whereby these left-wing activists with a different agenda could flood in and do what they want and just randomly, again, wreak havoc. So there's probably going to be a reckoning for Mr. Fry, despite his wonderful head of hair and dashing good looks. And so who knows what's going to happen? I have a hard time believing that this is going to de-escalate unless there's a truly major crackdown. Apparently there's National Guard who have been sent in. Unclear precisely under what orders they're operating. But if you recall, Ferguson, the National Guard was sent there under the jurisdiction of the governor. Jay Nixon, if memory serves, was the governor of Missouri at the time, and obviously authorized by Obama. So Trump is not alone in authorizing the use of National Guard to suppress or curtail civil unrest of this kind. However, in Minneapolis, it's quite a different racial dynamic, it seems, from Missouri. That's just due to the composition of the population. Yeah, but I also think a different kind of ideological element there as well. And before you start screaming Antifa is kind of just a concept. I mean, are there Antifa groups? Yeah, but I don't think it really has much explanatory value to just call every random left-wing activist Antifa, as if there's like a central headquarters that they all conspire in. That's not kind of really how it works. And if you don't have firsthand experience with them, I can understand how you might have that misimpression. But it's just not really the case. And then, so we have this other issue now of Twitter deciding to censor Trump's tweets. Great idea. Gee whiz. So they denounced, or so they censored one of Trump's tweets, claiming that it glorified violence. let me actually read to you what they actually wrote here, because it's pretty absurd. They say that Trump's tweet, quote, violates our policies regarding the glorification of violence. Based on the historical context of the last line, its connection to violence, and the risk it could inspire similar actions today. Okay, so let me just give you the tweet here that they're making this claim of. Trump says, these thugs, all caps, are dishonoring the memory of George Floyd, and I won't let that happen. Spoke to Governor Tim Walz and told him that the military, capitalized, is with him all the way. Any difficulty, and we will assume control, but when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Thank you. Okay, so not even exactly clear that Trump is encouraging shooting there. I think he might just be saying, once you have looting, once you have street violence of this kind, it's going to beget shooting. And in fact, there were shots fired last night by some of the shop owners. There was an owner of a tobacco shop who's on a radio reporter captured shooting his shotgun into the air to scare off the rioters that were trying to infiltrate his store. And eventually he had to flee, and they did infiltrate the store, and they got cigarettes and hookahs and other tobacco products and then lit it on fire. So, it's not clear to me that Trump was necessarily encouraging violence there. And even if he was arguably encouraging violence, how is it within Twitter's purview to make a subjective determination as to whether that's warranting of censorship? They're never going to apply this glorifying violence standard remotely equitably. I 100% guarantee you that. Not a shadow of a doubt. Because they will never apply this glorification of violence standard to, for example, state violence. So if somebody glorifies the United States military dropping bombs someplace, or glorifies the ordering of an assassination someplace, or even a foreign military, if they glorify, say, the Israeli military, the British military, or the Russian military taking violent state action, nobody's ever going to say that violated any kind of terms of first service and therefore necessitated Twitter's censorship intervention. So it makes no sense. And how do you define what constitutes glorification of violence? It's so subjective. And so what Twitter is doing is it's now confirming itself not to be a neutral arbiter. I don't know if it wants to be regulated. Maybe it does. Maybe it wants to be done with the... I don't know what the logic is exactly. I do know that Trump is never going to abandon Twitter. He kind of vaguely threatened to do so yesterday. Because Twitter is a massively influential tool for him and has been since he started running for the presidency. It was a big reason why, for example, he first won the Republican nomination in 2016 because it allowed him to dictate news cycles, allowed him to set the narrative in the media, and then was also a major tool as he was running against Hillary in the general election, and then even as president, it's a major tool. So there's no way in hell that he's going to abandon it, but he has elevated it now as sort of a foil or an enemy, and which is weird because he makes use of the platform for his own ends. So it's kind of... I think part of the logic there is that the Republicans are largely deferential to the business community, but the tech community is not a business sector that's aligned with the Republican Party, so they're much more happy to villainize them, whereas they would never do that to the oil and gas sector or real estate sector, that kind of thing. It's just you have factions of the business, quote unquote, community that are aligned with the Democrats, factions aligned with the Republicans. And by and large, the tech sector is not aligned with the Republicans, so Trump has something to lose by starting a flame war. And Twitter loves this, I think, because having some kind of drama with Trump increases engagement on their platform, increases the eyeballs. So maybe their stock price dips temporarily, but believe it or not, Twitter has actually just become profitable in the last 2 years. So this is no skin off Twitter's back, really. But it is skin off the back of people who want a free public dialogue, who don't think that it's the role of tech officials, Twitter officials, or whomever, to intervene in political disputes and be adjudicators of like what is permissible speech. That is a bad road to go down. We've already been going down it to a large extent, but this has been an escalation. And you know what? We'll have to see. I do know that there was no social distancing being practiced at these riots. So probably going to have some corona cases that sprout up. And, you know, there's definitely a double standard in terms of the media portrays left-wing protesters versus right-wing. Right-wing protesters are hyper-analyzed and condemned. Sometimes rightly so. I mean, I didn't agree with these Reopen America protests that were very paranoid and conspiratorial and ridiculous with a lot of armed people. So I wasn't in agreement with them, but they were hyper-analyzed and scrutinized, whereas these activists won't be scrutinized anywhere near the same degree, largely because the media has a basic affinity with at least the ostensible reasons for why they were protesting, which is to get vengeance or to get retribution or justice for the killing of this person who was wrongfully killed. And by the way, it needs to be underscored, he was wrongfully killed. This officer acted just in a mind-bogglingly ridiculous way, was fired, probably going to be prosecuted. And so that's my basic takeaway. If you have any thoughts to share, let me pull up my super chats here. Hopefully I can access my super chats while simultaneously streaming. That's never a guarantee, I find. This is my hold music. Okay, I can't find the super chat window. I will figure that out ahead of time next time. Let me. I'll just scroll through manually. And if I missed yours, I apologize. Sparky, my benefactor, says, when I was a kid, police were officer friendly. Nowadays, they're just roided out thugs who see the public at large as enemy combatants. You know, I hear variations of that a lot from people who recall back in the old days when the officer on the beat was somebody you knew, who you were friendly with, who didn't necessarily resort to taking aggressively punitive action against any scofflaw, and kind of informally resolved a lot of disputes. Now, a lot of stuff is more formalized. You have technology that makes everybody's actions hyper recorded. And yeah, it's a different dynamic. But I think in the case of this officer who killed Floyd, there's something else going wrong there psychologically, because that was just insane. Sparky adds, this is common treatment by police of anyone who they perceive as poor. Poor whites are mostly out in the country, so cops pick on poor blacks. Yeah, I'm not even sure that this individual, Floyd, was necessarily poor. I think he was under suspicion for some kind of financial transaction issue, I don't know exactly. But he seemed to be a lower class, definitely. So, yeah, I mean, police can extract revenue from being overly zealous in terms of finding people, ticketing people, arresting people, because that's a revenue generator. And you're more likely to get away with it with lower class people across races. What did I miss? Okay, I guess that's about it. Probably gonna be following the story, I guess, just because it's a dominant story right now. See what happens, to quote Donald Trump. And I'll check in later. So have a reasonably good day, I guess.